Okay, so now we're gonna be looking at where the Romans basically get no help from the West because the West just got completely wrecked by the Ottomans at the Battle of Nicopolis. So yeah, the Romans are just gonna basically be sitting ducks now.
With the Crusader armies scattered on the shores of the Danube, and leaders of the Christian coalition fleeing back to their own domains in defeat, Bayezid I now had free reign over the Balkans. The Sultan's victory at Nicopolis would be the highlight of his military career and put the Ottoman Sultanate on the radar of powerful states across the entire Christian and Islamic worlds. With Hungary and Wallachia now engulfed in political turmoil after their defeat to Bayezid, potential Ottoman invasions further into Europe became ever more likely in the years to come. The only obstacle standing in the way of Bayezid and his dream of becoming the true ruler of the Romans was now the land walls of Theodosius. As events now stood, it seemed that in a few short years, the entire Balkan Peninsula would fall and submit to the thunderbolt of Edirne. However, no grand Ottoman military campaign directed toward Europe came in the years after the Crusader defeat. Even though the Battle of Nicopolis had been a decisive victory for Bayezid, it had come at a considerable loss, as many Ottoman levies were lost in the conflict. As a result, after the remaining Crusader prisoners were transported back to Anatolia, the Ottoman Sultan decided to consolidate his forces and focus on the blockade of Constantinople instead of pushing deeper into Europe. Although Hungary and Wallachia were no longer threats for the time being, before leaving for the Byzantine capital in early 1397, Bayezid stormed into the holdings of Tsar Ivan Stratsimir. The former vassal of Edirne had cooperated with the Crusaders during the Nicopolis campaign, and thus had to be eliminated. In a short military campaign, Vidin and its surrounding territories were captured, and the former Bulgarian Tsar was imprisoned and later strangled to death while in captivity in Bursa. With the conquest of the last independent
that had to happen. He did immediately jump ship, right? So yeah.
Bulgarian holdouts secured, the fortress town of Vidin was installed with a significant Ottoman garrison once more, and its fortifications were strengthened.
At Wayfair?
As the last remnants of resistance were put down in Bulgaria, the Thunderbolts' war against Constantinople increased in intensity. Bayezid's blockade of the Byzantine capital had become a full-scale siege by 1397, as occasional Ottoman assaults on the Theodosian walls began. It is said that during this period of hostilities, the confident Ottoman Sultan and his senior officials stood on hills overlooking Constantinople, deciding who would get which palace after the eventual fall of the city. Meanwhile, down south, local Ottoman contingents, led by the Marcher Lords of Thessaly, had also struck deep into southern Greece, temporarily occupying the town of Athens.
Okay. Evrenos Bey was at the age of, oh my goodness, at the age of 110 during this campaign, and he had been actively serving the Ottoman Sultanate since the era of Orhan Gazi. That's insane. This might be one of the oldest guys leading. Wow.
And sacking the town of Argos. During this campaign, the forces of the Byzantine Emperor's younger brother, Theodori I of Morea, were defeated near the town of Leontari in a decisive battle. The brutal Ottoman invasion reached down south as far as Modon and Koron, which saw many inhabitants in the region being taken away into slavery. As remnants of Byzantine Greece were ransacked, Manuel II was left pleading with European diplomats in his court for military assistance, as famine once again struck the imperial capital. However, the fortunes of the Byzantine emperor changed in the following years. By 1399, the emperor's desperate appeals were heard by King Charles VI of France, and a 1,200-strong French contingent was sent to the Byzantine capital by sea after evading the Ottoman blockade. This small western host was commanded by Marshal Boucicaut, a French military leader who had been present at Nicopolis and was ransomed back to France in the years after the battle. Upon entering the capital, Boucicault was given the title of Grand Constable by the Emperor and began organizing minor sally-out operations against the Muslim besiegers. However, more importantly than a military solution, the French nobleman brought a political solution to the Byzantine capital, as he began reconciliation talks between Manuel II and his nephew John VII, who still claimed the imperial throne. John VII had been a loyal vassal to Edirne for many years. However, with Bayezid's siege of Constantinople came the violent ransacking of the last remaining Byzantine holdings in Thrace. Witnessing his own lands in Salimbria being sacked, and seeing no stop to the violent actions of the tyrant ruler of the Ottomans, John began to reconsider his relationship with Edirne. Being on good terms with both the emperors of Constantinople and Salimbria, Boucicault finalized a political agreement between uncle and nephew by the end of 1399. The junior John VII was to become the official heir of Manuel II, while the latter's eldest son was to be next in line for the throne. The Palaiologon dynasty was once more united.
Wow, the French coming in. After they kind of helped, after their really bad performance last video, where they just charged in recklessly, it's kind of cool to see that the French heard that and were kind of really eager to actually help the Romans, which is unique. And friggin' Boucicault showed up and just is making everything better. Marshal Boucicault, man, that's pretty cool though.
With his household in check, Manuel made plans to travel to Western Europe to gather critical military and fiscal support for Constantinople. Declaring John VII as his regent in the capital and giving him command of the defences of the city, the Byzantine emperor embarked on his visit to the west in December of 1399. Manuel II's 3-year trip would see him travel into European lands that had not seen a Roman emperor in almost 1,000 years. The Emperor of the Romans first visited the domains of his younger brother, Theodore I, in Morea, alongside his wife Helena Dragas and their 2 infant sons. However, seeing that the situation in Modon and the wider region was in a dire state, caused by the recent Ottoman invasion, Manuel and his entourage quickly made for Italy. The emperor first visited Venice, and then went through the northern Italian countryside, reaching Milan by the spring of 1400. Along his journey in the local region, Manuel met with a number of Byzantine scholars who had, by the time of the Ottoman siege of Constantinople, found work in the cities of northern Italy as professors of classical Greek studies. One of these scholars included the famous Byzantine diplomat turned humanist philosopher Manuel Chrysolorus, who taught Greek grammar and literature in Florence, Rome, Venice and Bologna, much to the interest and appetite of the educated Italian upper class. During the emperor's journey around Europe, the 2 men would keep a close correspondence, often discussing any developments of promised aid to Constantinople, which saw Chrysolorus often relaying news back to the besieged imperial capital. By the summer of 1400,
Yeah, man, this is kind of like a really sad state, kind of watching the Romans as they've essentially kind of been reduced to beggars for, like I said, they just have like some holdings in Thrace and Constantinople, that's it, like, you know, and they're basically just holding on for dear life. And again, it kind of is, like I said, similar to being reduced to a beggar, because they're just going around like, please help. And meanwhile the rest of Europe's like, no, if you die we can claim to be the new Rome, so no. I'm joking, but like, yeah, again, it is kind of just sad and very desperate on their part, you know?
As the seeds of the Renaissance were taking root in the cities of northern Italy, Manuel II had made his way to the court of Charles VI of France in Paris. Unfortunately for the Byzantine emperor, the French king had succumbed to one of his periodic fits of lunacy.
Yeah, I remember this from the 100 Years' War series. During an episode of madness, Charles felt under threat and drew his sword, then assaulted his own companions, causing multiple deaths.
And thus, no help for the Romans was secured in the Kingdom of the Fleur-de-Lis. After failing to gather any substantial funds from the Mad King of Paris, Manuel embarked on a ship to England to visit the court of Henry IV, thus making him the first legitimate Roman emperor to visit the island since the days of Constantine the Great and his sons during the 4th century AD.
Wow.
Although treated lavishly with a jousting tournament by the English king and being hosted at Eltham Palace during Christmas celebrations, again no substantial funds were gathered to defend the Roman capital. The emperor's visit to England had not come at an ideal time, as the recent death of the Plantagenet king Richard II and the recent Anglo-Scottish War had destabilized the new Lancastrian regime of Henry IV. With the English armies preoccupied in Scotland and France, only a sum of 3,000 marks was donated to the pleading Manuel II. Returning back.
Yeah, this is just sad. But everyone has their own things going on. That's also the thing. Everyone has their own issues and just can't just be generous enough, you know, can't afford the generosity of just giving a lot to helping the Romans, which at this point need a miracle, right? It's just everyone has their own thing going on, so it's kind of sad.
Back to Paris, the Byzantine emperor then sent delegations to the courts of Pope Boniface IX, Pope Benedict XIII, Margaret I of Denmark, Martin of Aragon, and Charles III of Navarre, but again to no avail. Due to the recent defeat at Nicopolis, the decline of a general crusader ethos in Europe, and a lack of political will to save Constantinople, no significant military or fiscal assistance was given to the desperate Manuel during his travels to the west. With the Theodosian walls of Constantinople barely holding out against the Ottoman siege, and famine hitting the streets of the capital, new developments in Anatolia forced Bayezid to turn his gaze away from the city for the time being. Aladdin Ali Bey of the Karamanids, in a desperate third attempt to reduce Ottoman
Freaking Ali, dude. This dude just keeps trying.
Influence in Anatolia, had invaded the domains of Edirne once more. By 1397, the Karamanid Bey had already taken the Ottoman provincial capital of Ankara by surprise and began to advance through the former lands of the Gurmiyanids toward the old Ottoman capital of Bursa. Resolved to once and for all put an end to the Karamanid nuisance, the Thunderbolt began assembling his armies to meet Ali Bey in Anatolia. The following war between the two Turkic leaders was to be a short one. After leaving a token force to continue the siege on Constantinople, the Ottoman Sultan defeated the Karamanid Bey in a one-sided battle outside of Bursa on the nearby Akçay plain. After the short engagement, Aladdin Ali Bey of the Karamanids, the man who defied the supremacy of Edirne for over a decade, was executed. All his remaining domains were annexed into the Ottoman Sultanate. Wanting to further consolidate his rule in the region, that following year, Bayezid launched his second grand military campaign into Anatolia. The Ottoman Sultan began by first marching on and forcibly annexing the minor petty Turkic beyliks of Janik alongside the Black Sea, thus expanding his borders with the Byzantine rump state of Trebizond. With his northern flank secured, the Thunderbolt now turned his attention to one of the few men who had defeated him in open battle, Kadi Burhanuddin. However, Bayezid's lust for revenge for his defeat at Kirkdilim back in 1391 was not meant to be. The Islamic scholar turned sultan had been killed the same year during an internal conflict with the Akkayunlu, a Turkoman tribal confederation situated at the edges of eastern Anatolia. As a result of the political anarchy caused by the war and the death of Burhanuddin, many of the notables of the region requested Ottoman military assistance against the Akkayunlu in return for accepting the suzerainty of Edirne, much to the delight of Bayezid. After a short and successful military campaign led by the Sultan's eldest son, Suleiman Çelebi, the Akkayunlu were defeated, and many major towns in the region, such as Amasya, Sivas, Kayseri, Erzincan and Tokat, were incorporated into the Ottoman Sultanate. However, these territorial acquisitions would have unintended consequences for the Sultan of the Ottomans. As Bayezid expanded his realm into eastern Anatolia, it brought him to the doorstep of two of the most potent Islamic powers of his age. To his south was the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, which held suzerainty over the neighboring Ramazanid and Dulkadirid Beyliks. After coming to power during the 13th century after the fall of the Ayyubids, the Mamluk Sultans of Egypt quickly became some of the most powerful military leaders of the Islamic world. While the Ottomans were still in their infancy during the reigns of Osman and Orhan, the Mamluks had pushed out the last Crusader holdouts in the Holy Lands with its acquisitions of Akka in 1291 and Ruad in 1302, in addition to driving off the Mongol hordes at the battles of Ain Jalut in 1260 and Marj al-Safar in 1303. In addition to their mighty prowess on the battlefield, the Mamluk Sultans of Egypt also held on to the politically important cities of Mecca, Medina and Jerusalem, on top of hosting the religiously important yet politically powerless Abbasid caliphs in their capital of Cairo. All of these factors would contribute to the Mamluk Sultanate being one of the most prestigious and established Islamic powers of its age.
So I'm assuming that since he's talking about the consequences, that the Ottomans are going to come into conflict, hopefully in this series, with the Mamluks, who seem to be a new great threat to them, potentially, or rival, if you would.
Compared to the newly emerging Ottoman Sultanate. However, this era of dominance was to be fleeting for Cairo. By the time of Bayezid, central authority from Cairo was on the decline after the death of the formidable Mamluk Sultan Barkuk in 1399, thus leaving his sultanate in the care of his inexperienced 10-year-old son Sultan Faraj. Seeing an opportunity to fill in the political void left by the former Mamluk Sultan, and wanting to expand his domains further into the Taurus Mountains and Cilicia, during the summer of 1399, the Thunderbolt launched a military campaign against the Beyliks of Ramazanid and Dulkadirid. The following campaign resulted in an Ottoman victory that saw the city of Malatya being annexed and an Ottoman puppet ruler, Mehmed Bey, being installed as the head of the Dulkadirids. Although militarily successful, the Ottoman campaign into the local region resulted in the severing of ties between Edirne and Cairo, at a time when Bayezid needed all the help he could get against his more dangerous neighbor to his east. As the Ottoman Sultan's military campaign ended, a new threat in the form of the Timurids had reached the doorsteps of Anatolia, led by their ruler Timur, also known as Tamerlane in the west.
Oh crap, holy crap. I was wondering what that giant red empire next to them was. I just had a PTSD flashback, guys. Remember that video we saw? I think it was from Simple History, and then it was like evil kings and evil things they'd done, and then Timur, if this is the same Timur, who like ran over like thousands, or was it hundreds or thousands of children with his horsemen, like brutal, a very brutal man. As we know, like I was really horrified at hearing that, and if this is the same man, holy crap, if he sets his eyes on the Ottomans, that's gonna be brutal. I have to watch the next video. I have to find out if this is the same Timur. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments, but if it is, holy crap.